All right. Welcome everyone to chapter 14. This is the first lecture video out of 3, and we'll be looking at the sales volume variance. So overall, these lectures are going to focus on sales variances. So this is kind of a continuation of the last couple sections. And then at the end, we'll do a small section on customer profitability. So let's get started. I'm sure you guys all recognize this. And what we did before is we really looked at the static budget, right? That's the overall difference between what actually happened in our original budget. And then we broke that down into sales volume. So what variance occurred because of changes in the sales volume, and then also the flexible budget. What changes or variances occurred because of things, manufacturing costs and selling prices. So all of this is what we focused on in our last lecture series. But today we're really going to focus on this over here and end up breaking down a totally new hierarchy. So real quick, what are sales variances? Well, we're going to focus on the variation in sales volume and how that can be explained. And why could sales volume variances occur? Where there can be overall quantity reasons. So just overall, we sold more or less of our products than we anticipated. But there's also a mix of products. Reasons due to a mix of products. So in the last series of examples, we used Oasis Pool Company, and all they sold were pools. But you could also get variances. Assume you sell 10 products. At the beginning of the year, you budget your thoughts on how all 10 of those products are going to sell. But even if you sell the overall same quantity of all your products together, there could be fluctuations in how much each product sold compared to that product's budget. And those fluctuations within the overall product mix across all your products will also create these sales volume variances. So just focusing on these quantity reasons. So why could sales quantity change? Well, that could kind of be, the main part would be due to market effects. And this could say the market size overall changed. So the overall market for our type of good just increased. People are going crazy for it. Or it decreased. People are just, we sell typewriters. And typewriters are kind of out of fashion. Or it could be our share of the total market may have changed. So maybe we were, BlackBerry, the cell phones. So at the beginning of the year, we're BlackBerry. I don't know if you guys even remember BlackBerry, but it's a cell phone for generally targeted to business people. Beginning of the year, we have a big market share, but towards the end of the year, even though the markets for cell phones are growing like crazy, Samsung and Apple, they've come out with new and better products, so our overall market share decreased, and so our sales quantity overall decreased. So these sales quantity reasons and the mix of products reasons, these are going to be what we're going to talk about for the majority of the rest of the lecture series. So these just switched compared to our previous lecture series where before we really focused on breaking down this flex budget. But now we're going to say, okay, we know static budget from prior lectures, we know flex budget for prior lectures, and all we did in prior lectures was really just touch on how to calculate the overall sales volume variance. And that again was just our contribution margin multiplied by the difference between our actual sales quantity and budgeted sales quantity. And we did that for Oasis Pools, just their one product. So today we're going to continue looking at the sales volume variance. And similar to flexible budget, we're going to break this variance down into multiple variances and then start breaking down those variances further. Just to highlight what's going to happen, we'll go over the calculation here again. We'll learn about sales quantity variance and we'll learn that calculation. But once we get to sales mix variance and these market share or market size and market share variances, these we're just going to talk about at a conceptual level. We're not going to dive into the nitty-gritty calculations because for these items, the best thing to know is what they mean at a conceptual level. So when you get out into the real world and you see these variances at your clients or at your firm, you'll be able to understand what these mean and how they relate to each other. So that's just a highlight of what we're going to do going forward. So let's dive in, and here for the rest of the examples, we're going to be looking at Yankee Candle Factory. So again, before we used Oasis Pools and they had one product, now we're going to have a company that has 3 products. So they have their festive candles, their travel tin candles. I just realized that's kind of funny. Got to have your travel candles. Don't want to go on vacation without your Apple candles. And then they also have their double wick candles. These sound like some fancy candles. So we're going to do all our analysis using these 3 different product lines. All right, so now let's start. We'll assume we already did our static budget like last lecture series. We did our flex budget, and now we're going to focus on our sales volume variance. We'll calculate that first before we start breaking this down. So if you remember, our calculation for sales volume variance was contribution margin times our actual quantity sold minus budgeted quantity sold. And in our prior series, like we said, Oasis Pools had one product. So we just did this one time. But now we have our 3 different products, and so we're going to have to do this calculation 3 times, one for each product, and then sum all the favorable or unfavorable variances together. So first thing we'd need to know is our contribution margin. So for festive candles, it's our $8 minus our $4 variable expense is $4. For our cool travel candles, it's $12 sales minus $9 variable costs. We have a $3 contribution margin. And for the double wick candles, $10 sales, $4 variable expense. We have a $6 contribution margin. And then here we have all our actual and budgeted sales quantities. So let's carry that forward and start the calculation. So like I said, we have our contribution margin per our budget times our actual minus budget. And hope you remember from the last lecture series that whenever you see this word variance, you can look back and it's pretty informative of what we're calculating. Here it's the sales volume variance. So the thing we're going to vary, or we're going to compare, are 2 different types of sales volume. And we always do actual minus budget. So sales volume variance means we're going to vary the sales volume actual versus budget. And in this one, we're going to multiply that by our budgeted contribution margin. So for our festive candles, we calculate on the prior page that they have a $4 contribution margin. They planned 2,000 units sold, or they planned 3,000 units sold. They actually sold 2,000. So that is a $4,000 variance. And real quick, always take a step back and say, we planned 3,000. We actually sold 2,000. Do we like or dislike selling less than we planned on selling? We really dislike that. We always want to sell more. So that means this is an unfavorable variance. For the most part, I like to ignore these positive and negatives and just step back and think about it. That's the best way to get an accurate favorable or unfavorable. So we can repeat the process for travel. We see that this equals $10,500 variance. Well, we planned on $7,500. We actually sold $4,000. We dislike selling less, so that must be an unfavorable balance. Do it for our high contribution margin product. Here we had $4,500. We actually sold 6,000, so we have a 9,000 variance. Oh, whoops, see? This says unfavorable, but if we step back, we planned on selling 4,500, but we sold 6,000. So we like that. So this is actually a favorable variance. So I just caught myself. So it's always great. It's just evidence that it's always great to step back and really think about these before you start labeling them. So then we would go ahead and sum all these up, and we see that overall our sales volume variance is about $5,500 unfavorable. And so it's not as straightforward when you have multiple products, but really all you're going to do is repeat the process for each product and sum them together. So now we've calculated our sales volume variance. Let's go ahead and let's start breaking this down, and let's focus on sales mix variance. So what the sales mix variance, it just says that you have multiple products and your sales mix has changed since your budget. So imagine you have two products, A and B, and at the beginning, so your budget, you budgeted that you would sell a 50-50 mix of these products. Well, if you end up selling your actuals, you sell 75% of your products are A and 25% of your products are B, that means your sales mix has changed, and that will create a variance. The only way you wouldn't have a variance is if your actuals ended up being 50-50. And this is the same if you had multiple products. Any times that sales mix is different from what you budgeted, you'll have a sales mix variance. And so here's the calculation for it. So let's go over that real quick. But importantly, you won't have to actually calculate these out. For the most part, all you need to do is be able to understand what this variance means. And so this calculation you would have to do for each one of your products. And it says overall, the difference in your overall sales of each product. This is your mix up here. We could do a quick comparison. You thought A was going to be 50%, but A ended up being 75%. So that difference is going to be multiplied by the total units of all your goods sold times the contribution margin of A. And all this is really doing is putting a weight on the contribution margin of A and saying, hey, when you sold more or less of A than you thought, how does that impact your overall sales volume variance? And so let's go one step further, and we'll talk a little more about this with some examples. So when would sales variances, mix variances, be favorable? And so if you think about at the individual product level, so we have A and B, as in our prior example, our budget, we thought at the beginning of the year was going to be 50-50. But our actual, we find A is 75 and B is 25%. So at the individual product level, a sales mix variance will be favorable when the actual was greater than the budget. So in this example, A's actual is greater than budget is favorable. For B, actual ratio, or the actual mix, the proportion of B products that were sold is less than budget. This is the budgeted amount, is less than budget. So that means for B, this is unfavorable. So that's how you know at an individual product level if they had a favorable sales mix. But at the aggregate level, it's a little trickier. When you would have a sales mix variance that's favorable means that in this scenario, it would mean that A is your higher contribution margin product. So if A's contribution margin was $10 and B's contribution margin was $5, well, if A ends up having a higher sales mix, a higher percentage of your sales comes from A, well, that's a good thing. We like selling more of our high value products. So at an aggregate level, you have a favorable variance when your higher contribution margin products are a higher percentage of your sales mix. And unfavorable would be vice versa. In this scenario, if A actually had a lower contribution margin, we wouldn't be happy if our lower contribution margin ended up selling more than our better products, right? So just remember, this is when it's favorable. We always want our sales mix to lean towards our more valuable products. So that's conceptually what sales mix looks at. It says, hey, all of our products, the sales mix changed from budget. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's a bad thing if you sold more of your low dollar products than you anticipated, but it's a good thing if you sold a lot more of your high value products than anticipated. So that's all sales mix variance means. It says our product mix changed. Did we change towards our more valuable or our cheaper products? So that would explain a part of our sales volume variance. In the next lecture series, we'll actually look at the other part, a sales quantity variance. And we'll do a similar thing. We'll maybe do a couple examples and just show at a conceptual level what this sales quantity variance means, and then the same with the two components. So here's the example problem for you guys to work on. And this says, at first, calculate the sales volume variance. Remember, we have to do the sales volume variance calculation for all of the products. And then it just says, look at the contribution margin and the sales quantities and see if you can come up with an expectation on the sales mix variance. Is it going to be favorable or unfavorable? So in general, you probably need to look at either eyeball it or calculate out kind of the sales mix compared to the budget versus actual gallons, and see if that sales mix changed, how does the change influence the variance given the actual contribution or the budgeted contribution margins. So don't do too much on this, but just try to look at these changes. For instance, salted caramel, it went from 50,000 to 180,000. Vanilla went from 250,000 to 180,000. So just look at those and their associated contribution margins and see if you can reason through how you think this would affect the sales mix variance. So that's it for this first lecture. We've really just started looking at the sales volume variance side of things and really just focus on the sales mix and sales volume variance to this point. In the next lecture, we'll get down into the sales quantity variance, and we'll break that down into market size and market share variances. So I'm excited to see you guys in the next lecture.